Hello students, today we will be going over 12.1, naming and marking congruent parts. This is page 240 in your green packet. Our objective, I can write congruent statements for angles, lines, and triangles, and use congruents to solve for unknown values. Vocabulary, congruent, that's this sign right now. What that means? Identical in form, coinciding exactly when superimposed. Congruent sides are the same length and congruent angles have the same measurement. Congruent markings communicate congruent relationships. Figures do not need to be drawn to scale. Congruent sides are marked with lines. The same number of lines indicate that the lengths are equal. For example, the XY is congruent to IG in the example there, and there's one line on each of those through the line. YZ, if you notice where YZ is, it's congruent to GH, and there's two little lines between those two for each side, indicating that. And ZX, there's three lines there through that line segment, is congruent to HI, and again, three lines there. Congruent angles are marked with arches, like these are with arches. These two angles are congruent, these two, and these two. And they're marked with arches, 1, 2, or 3 arches to indicate that. If you see angle X with one arch, it's congruent to angle I, and so forth on your paper. I'm going to get right into it. You can go over some of those examples, but I'm going to jump to page 242 and actually do some problems that you're going to need to do for your homework. This is number 11 on page 242. We have these two triangles, and it tells us which angles are congruent and what sides are congruent. So with angle W being congruent to angle G, for the angle, again, they're arches. W, I'm going to put one arch there. G, one arch there. The next one, angle V, I'm going to have two arches there, is congruent to angle H, two arches there. Angle F is congruent to angle X. So we draw three arches there. Next, we're going to go on to our different sides that are congruent. As we see, WX is congruent to GF. So this, again, when they're sides, we mark them with just WX right there, one little marking there, is congruent to GF. Then WV, I'm going to put two marks there, is congruent to HG. Then we say VX, now we're going to up to three markings there, is congruent to HF. Three marks there. Then for our triangle, we're going to go ahead and write, again, triangle. For our triangle statement, again, our angles and sides have to match up. We're going to say triangle WXV is congruent. Now, which one was congruent to angle W? G. So we can match it up with triangle G. Which was congruent to X? Was F. And then V was congruent to H. So triangle WXV is congruent to GFH. And you can go ahead and do number 12. We're going to move on to the next page, to page 243. Number 13. Now the triangle is drawn for you, and it's all marked, and you need to put the angles inside and then write which triangle is congruent. Okay. Okay, so angles, one arch, notice the two one arches are here. If I just say angle L, we don't know which one it is out of those four angles, so we have to use three letters to name it. So I'm going to say angle WLX. So angle WLX is congruent to NLM. Angle NLM. Okay. Next one has two arches. I can just put angle X is congruent to angle M. Three arches, I can say angle W is congruent to angle N. There's our three arches, okay, or arcs. Okay, for our sides, we're going to say one mark, XL. So that's line segment XL is congruent to line segment ML. Okay, two marks, we can say WX is congruent to MN. Three marks, I can say WL. Now I could also name this LW, it's the same, is congruent to NL. Okay. Now for our triangle, we can say triangle XWL is congruent to triangle MNL. And that's all we have to do on that one. Okay. Next, I'll let you do 14 and some of the others later. We're going to go on to 15, where you know that it says mark the congruent parts, give congruent statements, and name triangles. Now the first one, the only thing you know is that these vertical angles are congruent. So we know this is congruent to that. But it doesn't give us any other information. So basically, you don't know that the triangles are congruent. So I'm just going to say that angle DFW, that's that one, is congruent, DFW, oh, I mean DVF. I said that wrong because the V has to be the middle one. DVF is congruent to WV, to angle WVU. And you don't know that the triangles are congruent if all that you know is one angle is congruent, because those others don't have to be, so you don't have to write anything down. Okay, the next one for 16, we know that RQ is the same in both, so it has to be congruent to itself. So you write RQ, oh, it's going to be line segment, is congruent to RQ. Okay. And again, we don't know that those triangles are congruent. We don't have a little box here to show that these are right angles, so we don't know. One could be 89 and one could be 91. So I'm going to have you put a dash through the triangles because we don't know that they're congruent. Next, we're going to go on to number 17. It says WX is parallel to IJ. That means we're going to put little arrow signs here. We know that this is parallel to this. They might not look like it, but if they say it is, then they are, okay? Then we're going to write our statements. A couple of other things to note. This H and this IHJ and WHX have to be congruent because they are vertical angles. So that's what we're going to start with. we're going to say that angle WHX is congruent to angle JHI. Next, since these are parallel lines, this one angle is going to be congruent to that one. So I'm going to say angle J is congruent to angle W. Then, because these are parallel lines, and this is a line through a parallel, a transversal through that, I'm going to put 3 angle arches there. And I'm going to say angle X is congruent to angle I. Okay. Okay, now we can say that our triangle WHX is congruent to triangle JHI. And we're done. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump to number 20. It says solve for X, mark and write statements for congruent parts. Okay, it tells you FH is parallel to GR. Okay, and we also are going to know that this is congruent to that. Okay, now since this is a line through parallel lines, we know that this is going to be congruent to this. Okay, we'll start with that to solve for X, because we know that 5X plus 3 has to be equal to 33. Minus 3 minus 3, 5X equals 30. X equals 6. Okay, so we solve for X. Now we can go ahead and write our statements. We can say that angle HVF is congruent to angle GVR. We can say that angle F is congruent to angle R. And we can also say that angle H is congruent to angle G. We need to make sure we mark that. 3 arches here. Like that. And now we can say our triangle is congruent as well. So we can say that triangle HVF is congruent to triangle GVR. Yeah, go ahead and write in the triangle. It's not written at the bottom right, but it should be written there. Statements and the triangle statements need to be there. You can do the rest, students. You rock.